to correct one thing very quickly. Peter said that hierarchies don't work. The title of this session is provocative on purpose. Most organizations are still very hierarchical. You have organization charts, pay grades. This stuff, however, networks, is not going away anytime soon. If you have kids, if you're a member of Facebook, if you tweet, etc. If you're paying attention to what's going on in Hong Kong over the last couple of days, this stuff is not going away. We are coming out of about anywhere from 75 to 50 to 30 years of codification as society has grown of what's called Taylorism and Fordism into all sorts of management science models, design of work, the design of structures, and so on. And now, if you believe in the term knowledge is power, networks are meeting these more stable structures. However, before we get into that, there are 5 generally perennial drivers of ongoing change in society. Demographics. For example, I'm 60 years old. Half a lifetime ago for me, 30 years ago, the world's population was about half of what it is today. By the time some of you hit 75, there will probably be 11 billion people on the planet. This makes things a bit trickier than it used to be. Stability is perhaps less likely. We also have much rapidly accelerating flows of information and so on. We also have younger generations coming in. We have roughly 4 generations in many workplaces these days, and so on. We also have service and stakeholder expectations. We started being told, probably 25 years ago, that the client was always right. Focus on the customer, customer-centric organizations, and so on. And the bar keeps getting higher, particularly as we have more customized offers and services. People want things their way, and they want it now in all sorts of realms of business, government, education, etc. We also have very, very significant shifts in values going on. I'm old enough to have remembered giving the peace sign at my high school graduation during the Vietnam War, and, for example, the word gay meant somebody happy. Now we have blended families, we have very high divorce rates, we have kids that have grown up with their parents being workaholics and saying, I don't want to live like that, and on and on and on. Pick your starting point. Values have been changing. We have today a generation that looks at very high student debt, mortgages that are probably impossible to afford, and saying, I'm going to live differently. I don't aspire to the same kind of success. So it's a little bit like a deep ocean current. The values are changing in significant ways. Technology, I don't have to say much about that. We keep getting new iPhones every, 9 months? We have now the Internet of Things coming at us. We have very recently mesh networks, which can root around absence of internet, or if it tries to be controlled by governments. That's what's going on today in Hong Kong. People are using FireChat, 100,000 downloads in the last 24 hours, in case the government shuts down the internet. The pace of change is accelerating. There's a new book out fairly recently by Douglas Rushkoff called Present Shock, subtitle, When Everything is Happening Now. There's some very interesting things about that, not the least of which are some things that are very, very dangerous for some of the things that root our culture and the way we make sense of things. Here's a chart showing the exponential growth since the death of Jesus Christ, let's say, and the arrival of different kinds of media. Print, with the Gutenberg printing press, then cinema and radio, then television, then internet. I was, roughly 6 years old or maybe 5 years old when that dot that says television was there. Look at the growth in population, and look at the dotted line is the growth in users of media since that time. Everybody watches television. There's television around the world. A very, very significant number of people are interconnected and connected to the internet now. We have smartphones around the world. There's something like, I think there's more smartphones in existence than there are people on the planet, or it's close, and so on. So there's an exponential growth curve, and this growth curve can touch many, many aspects of society, of business, of technology growth, of culture, and so on. And here's an example of this. I apologize for this being in French. Both Celine and I live and work a lot in French. I'm from Montreal. I'm working with a man who's translating a site that's about 300 pages that's really rewriting the theory of information. He's in his 80s. This is one of his concept maps, starting from prehistorical times through the Middle Ages, through the Renaissance, through the Industrial Era and the Post-Industrial Era. We have in the first of those three arrows users, and we have families, clans, cities, nations, empires. We have media and the growth of media. Then we have access, the time to access. It used to be for information 1 generation, passed from family to family, orally, and then 1 year, and then 1 month, and then 1 day, and now 1 hour. Something happens in the internet, everybody, if they're paying attention, knows about it in an hour. That's leading to, at the same time, this media is converging. All of this television, the internet, video, sound are all converging, and it's leading to a very significant rupture and then a fragmentation into niche markets. This is very, very important stuff to pay attention to because it represents a wholesale change to the assumptions that we have been operating under for the last 30 or 40 years about mass markets. So here's a very quick thing. The internet disintermediates and upends everything it touches eventually. We're seeing this with MOOCs in education. We're seeing this with Bitcoin. The question was raised yesterday about there will always be banking, but do we need banks? What happens if Google decides to become a bank? We don't know yet. Here's in that same growth curve, but it's talking about when we moved from, and again I apologize for it being French, from a text-based culture to an image-based culture. And think about this. We all went to school learning things that we had to take in and then either regurgitate or write essays on from reading books. Your brain operates differently with text as it takes it in and tries to understand it and processes the information than it does with photos and images. There's a book written in 1996 called The Horizontal Society that represents very much like a drift dive when you're scuba diving. Photos and videos, which we see, if you look at any newspaper now, there's a photo next to every article. Your brain deals with it differently. We are starting to make decisions based on emotions rather than reason. And this has very, very large impacts for all sorts of things that are going on in the business world, the educational world, the governmental world. In a very, very large sense, sociopolitically, we're going from back in the Middle Ages and before that, a time when the chiefs of clans became the kings in the fortresses, everybody was a peasant. There was a social contract. You behave, farm, we'll deal with the stuff that you produce, and we'll protect you. Then along came the clergy, who were along with the kings, if you've seen movies like The Name of the Rose and so on. And then in the industrial era, along came corporations. And in fact, CEOs and executives and senior people became very much like the kings and queens and the cardinals and bishops, still with top-down, you do what we tell you to do, we've got the strategic information, we take the decisions. We now have a bidirectional and fourth source of power, which is public opinion. Everybody connected, word of mouth. We've heard a lot about transparency for the last 5 to 10 years. It's starting to get real. This is the time when the information age that futurists started talking about 25 and 30 years ago as a paradigm shift, it's now biting us in the butt. It's getting real. And here's just an example of that's what we used to be. Now we're all in the middle of networks. We're sharing information with people. We are part of the network, the matrix, if you will, if you watch that movie. It's getting real, as I said. So we're still, in most organizations, operating the assumption with an org chart that each change is a discrete event. We will have time to absorb it, to adjust. The outcomes of plans are relatively predictable, and it's a continuation of the present. It's orderly progression. Whereas in networked hierarchies, it's a continuous rolling change. We're adapting and adjusting on the fly. And if you think of your daily working environments, it's probably more like this. It's relatively impossible to predict very clear outcomes. And as I mentioned before, we're starting to hear the word complexity tossed around all the time. There's information coming that can change things overnight, in an instant, that put plans that you've been working on to the side, and we have to start over again or adapt and so on. So here's a quote from, I did a course on this a few years ago in an executive MBA course, and one of the students came up with this. We know that organizations have a lot of project work, but now how we are organized is periodic. It's not stable any longer. And Here's the definition I came up with about 15 years ago. And I spent a lot of time writing job descriptions, drawing org charts, working with large multinational companies, creating pay grades, doing management development courses based on the protocols that are derived from where you belong in the organization. It was top-down, command and control, and I started paying attention to information technology and its effects on work and then networks. We're now into this two-way flow of power and authority. Somebody down in the organization can find out as much as you can, if you're the CEO, about an industry, about all sorts of issues and strategic issues, pass it around, make their people think, ask questions. It's based on knowledge, verifiable knowledge, trust between people, credibility that is established in relationships, and always a focus on results. This is a result of hyperlinks, the internet, the web, and all of what we've seen develop over the last 10 or 15 years. And here we have, you'll see it up there, and I hope it's going to appear on the screen anytime soon. I had one of the internet's very well-known cartoonists, Hugh MacLeod, build this for me a long time ago. You'll see it on Peter's t-shirt. I've given it to about 50 people around the world. What happens here is we have this traditional hierarchy, but actually things start emanating from it. People are testing initiatives. At the same time, there's this outside world. There's all of the people you collaborate with, contractors. We're all connected. We're in these flows of information. Somebody groups around an idea, an issue, an opportunity, a problem. You attract talent, you attract resources, but it's based on who wants to actually be involved with this, and something starts to happen. This is what we used to call 20 years ago skunk works, outside of structures. And then it starts, if it lives, and if it continues, it gets pulled back into the traditional organization. The point is, here, the walls of the organization used to be like fortress walls. They're now porous membranes that are interacting in an ecosystem with people outside and people all around in this ecosystem of information. And so back to the definition, it's a dynamic two-way flow of power and authority. It's really about treating people as adults, not as children. There's a field called Transactional Analysis from the 70s. I'm okay, you're okay. To tell us about how this actually works in the real world, there's a person I met about 4 years ago. We've gone back and forth a lot about it since then, Celine Schillinger from Sanofi Pasteur in Lyon, France.
We have enabled the people to become actors of their own communication, and we have broken the silos, the barriers that were dividing all functions, because now you can have somebody in Malaysia working in marketing, for example, sharing the story with the whole community. So even people working in the medical department in Mexico will know about what this person is doing. And even if it's not directly interesting for their day-to-day work, it's interesting in terms of, first, the feeling that I have the access to information, so I am being treated as an adult. It's not, my boss who decides what I should read, what I should have access to. And it's also creating a sense of common purpose. We are all working on the same project with the diversity of our functional perspectives. What I could understand from implementing those initiatives is that it's really important, since you're not living in the world of hierarchy anymore with those projects, you're not in a power authority, a position. You can't ask people to do stuff because you're the boss, okay? You're a member of network. So what's really important to have things done is to identify a common purpose, because that is, and it goes deep in the guts, that is what brings people to working collectively and producing shared value. It's also connecting people instead of, siloing them. And it's also a third very important element is to connect with them. It's not just, organize a community and let them speak together. It's you have, as an organization or as a top manager, you have to be there. You have to be a member of the community. And it goes with enablement. Some people say empowerment, but some don't like this term too much. So enablement, giving the tools for the people to be active network members. And it goes with letting go a bit. You know, we've grown control so much that it's pretty hard to get things done now in some organizations, and control is not always necessary, and we have to revisit this idea of control when we move to hierarchy. And it's really what I tell people in my organization that who are interested in going in this direction, and say, you are one of them. You are not above them. You are not, as Jon was saying, with a parent-child relationship. You are not a parent talking to a child. Your colleagues, your direct reports are not children, you know? They're adults. Your clients are not stupid, you know? You have to have this equal relationship. So is it easy to implement such kind of projects? Is it? Well, no, it's not at all. And it looks a bit more like that, because hierarchy is fighting back, and it's fighting back very heavily with all those things, you know, no urging, overestimation of risks, ignorance, fear, command and control culture, scientific culture, etc. Social stratification also. We like, you know, to have societies where, you know, have important people and non-important people. And this is completely contradictory with the idea of hierarchy. So a few things that I've learned along those projects is that you have to prepare very well. You have to start from the why. Why are you doing that? Because if you start from the how or the what, you can get, you know, kicked out very quickly by the hierarchy, by the corporate antibodies. Avoid focus on tools. It's not, you know, setting up an internal social network that will make hierarchy implemented. Tools are just, you know, an artifact. Go with baby steps, with pilot projects, so that the whole organization doesn't resist too much. Use established external connections. I believe in change, you know, outside-in change. I think is a very powerful driver for change. Embrace politics, you know, you have to understand that. Understand that it's experiential. If you get it, maybe not everybody gets it around you. So you have to understand that and give it time and put some energy into enabling people to understand why this is the future. And diversity is your best friend. Diversity of opinions, diversity of people, stakeholders, functions, etc. That is really, I think, the key. Diversity and inclusion are key factors to implementing projects adapted to the era of network. And my conclusion would be that it actually lies in your hands. It's up to you. You know, you can't just wait for hierarchy to happen, because it will not happen if you don't take a stance and establish a first little step in this direction.
In the short term, it makes management jobs and executive jobs in organizations harder. But I remind you, this stuff is not going away. The best thing to do is to, and I really commend you, I didn't see anybody looking at their smartphones during this session. Wow. You must have been interested, I'm guessing. At any rate, this is the world we're in from now on. It's not going to get easier, but you can get better at it, and it's adaptive. It's like learning a second language. You go to plateaus where I can remember trying to learn French, and I'd spend a day in French, and at the end of the day, I'd be just beat, physically tired, because you're really motoring along here. And then one day, and you make some mistakes, and then one day you wake up, and you're at this next plateau, and things are easier. And also, information that you're looking for starts coming to you because you're in these networks of people that are interested in the things that you're interested in or working on the same kinds of problems. And that's been the promise for a long time. We've heard a lot about breaking silos, busting silos, boundary spanners, et cetera, et cetera. We now have the tools. We now have the hyperlinks. This stuff's not going away.
Many of you work in ultra-hierarchical organizations. I mean, banks are not hierarchical organizations. They are over-hierarchical organizations. And we are comfortable in the fact that we've built structures and committees and silos because that's how we've always done things. I quit Alcatel after 18 months, and I've never worked for a boss again. I've worked in startups, and I love working in startups. And the reason I love startups is there are no org charts. I'll give you a very simple tip. If you ever invest in a startup, Maybe sometimes you're tempted to do that. And the startup has an org chart. Do not invest in that startup because it's not a real startup. It's very simple. The funniest moment in the life of a startup is when the first org chart is announced. I mean, in the beginning, it's very simple. We know, Frankie here, he's the genius. I mean, he's the technical wizard. He sleeps with the servers. He knows every line of code. And everybody knows that. We don't need an org chart to actually tell that. But the funniest moment is in a startup when you publish the first org chart, because obviously there's some investor who puts $45 million. They said, where's the org chart? I mean, if you put 45 million, where's the org chart? The moment that the first org chart is posted onto the wall of a startup, it is the most hilarious moment in the life of a startup because it is completely fake. We know they put Jerry as the chief technology officer because he has a really nice suit and a tie and he speaks in English, and whereas Frankie has flip-flops. He doesn't even own a suit, and everything he says scares away the investors. But there's no problem because you're, as the chief technology officer, everybody knows it's really Frankie who knows every line of code. But the problem is, if a company starts to grow, you rely on the org chart and you lose sense of that inner network. Many of us work in companies where we have lost touch with that inner network. This type of a session should be attended by the CEOs of your company, but they would be scared shitless if they saw something like that. The second type of people who should see this are the HR people in your organization. But I'll be telling you, I do presentations all over the world. The most confused animals on the planet today are people in HR. Yep. They have no idea because they're clinging on to methods and tools from the last century, and they have no idea how to deal with the next century. Don't think you can solve this with a tool. Many of you start to experiment. We have collaboration tools. We have, and I'm a big fan of Yammer, but Yammer won't solve this problem. What you will see in many companies is that the old saying, a fool with a tool is still a fool. You can't solve this with technology. You can only solve this if you embrace the concept and the culture of networks.